Hey, we're in this series called Age of Kings. We're talking about a history of the nation of Israel, a period of time that was roughly 450 years. And so I got to think about what our current age would be if we were to give our current age of a name. And I thought some might call it the age of internet, right? The age of internet. With that comes some good and maybe a lot of bad. It's interesting actually to see psychologists come out recently saying, we embrace this all and maybe we shouldn't have, but that's another sermon for another day. What I want to talk about today that I love about the internet is the power of a Google search, right? I mean, within seconds, you can get so much stuff, just at your fingertips, right? Whether it's the stats of a sports hero, maybe you want to know how to make those amazing Cheddar Bay biscuits from Red Lobster. I know, they're so good. Or maybe you want a gluten-free version of those, because that's your persuasion, and you can even find that. Or if you need a meme to remind you of why you hate cats so much, there's this. Meowed until the human woke up. I didn't need anything, just felt like being annoying. Reason 987 why I don't like cats. Why isn't it higher up on the list? It's just to show you that there's such a big list, okay? Or maybe you're a new parent and you can relate to this. How do I put this? You will never sleep in again. Those of you with young babies, let me promise you, there is hope for someday. It may be a while. But as funny as those are, one of the most useful things about the internet for me is fixing things. Has anybody in here ever tried fixing things with Google or YouTube, searching up how to do stuff? We were on a family vacation once and our van air conditioning broke with a pregnant wife in the back and it was like 85 degrees out and it was so hot. And we found a very quick fix on the internet for like $7 and it was some sensor that had gone out or whatever. Maybe you got to renovate your bathroom and you're trying to figure out how to tile the floor or your clothes dryer broke, whatever it is. Those of you who are younger in the room, you're forced to learn things in school, right? Whether it's music or science or history, math, whatever. Those of us who are adults, you should just know this because when you graduate out of high school and college, you figure that the driving force for adult learning is a need-to-know basis. And this is why the Google search is so helpful. The reason I know how to fix a dryer sensor isn't because I just wanted to know. It's because I wanted to save $200. The reason why you search for how to fix your car or how to, speak a foreign language for your travel or the way you sought out how to unclog your drain because those were problems that you had to solve. We search for answers to relevant questions. But what gets challenging in our Google searches is when there's more than one way to fix a problem. Let me tell you about a problem I had recently. We have a towel bar in our bathroom, and our kids, because they're little people, they pull on their towels, and it is great for a few months or years. But then over time, those little things inside, pull out, the anchors pull out, and suddenly you've got a mess on your hands. And so I'm like, okay, how am I going to fix this? So Google search, right? We'll find out how do I fix a towel bar. And I had some ideas in my mind. One of them was that I could patch up everything and move the towel bar over, which sounded like way more work than I was interested in doing. So as I continued searching, I discovered there's this cool thing called a toggle. Anybody know what a toggle is? It's like this spring-loaded thing that spreads out the weight over the surface area of the drywall, and now my kids can hang from the towel bar like little monkeys, and it won't fall down, right? I found a better approach, and I discovered in that process that not all solutions are equal, are they? And when it comes to fixing physical things, like a towel bar or unclogging your drain or the air conditioning, right? I mean, it's okay. You want a quality solution, but if you can't come up with one, you can always pay somebody to fix the problem. But when the stakes are higher, right? When it's not your towel bar that needs fixed, it's your marriage. When it's not your drain that needs unclogged, it's your heart. And we're not talking about your physical heart. I'm talking about your emotional heart. When suddenly you find yourself in this season of life and you're just lonely, and you don't know where to turn. When you find yourself in a season of life and your kids are struggling in their friendships and you're not exactly sure how to guide them. When you've got a big decision coming up and there are so many options and there are multiple paths that you can choose. When your kids are grown up and they're out of the house and now you're parenting adult kids. They're trying to adult and you're trying to parent them as adults. In those moments and so more, Google doesn't always give us the advice we're looking for, does it? In fact, the question becomes, what do you do when you don't know what to do? And the answers Google gives are conflicting. Sometimes they're unclear. And the stakes are too high, right? I mean, they're just too high to make a mistake. We need something foolproof. We need something that we can lean into, something to give us real direction. Well, it may surprise you that the answer to this question, what do you do when you don't know what to do, actually intersects with this period of history that we're talking about, the Age of Kings. And so I want to give you a quick recap of where we've been in case you haven't been with us. We've said all along that God didn't want the nation of Israel to have kings. His hope was that he would be their king. They didn't need a human king, but ultimately they wanted one because they saw what all the other nations were doing and they made the decision, we want to be like everybody else. And so God, he relented. He gave them what it was that they wanted. And so we've been looking at various kings that the nation of Israel experienced. And I hope one of the things you've discovered as we look at this time period that's about 3,000 to 2,500 years ago is that though the world has changed and though technology has changed, the truth is people haven't really changed, right? I mean, people haven't changed and the problems people deal with haven't really changed. Maybe the circumstances surrounding them, but when you get to the root of the issues, they are largely the same. And so that's one of the greatest lessons I think we can learn as we look at the lives of these men who were kings of the nation of Israel. Now, one of the amazing things that we have throughout our scriptures is something that no other group of people has from this time period. We have all kinds of literature. We don't just have the historical record of 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, but we have accompanying records. We have Proverbs, we have Psalms, we have wisdom literature, we have prophecies speaking into what was taking place. And so I've been inviting you to read along with me through this chronologically as we kind of embrace all of this. And I want to invite you, if you haven't been doing so through our church app, you can do that. There's a link where you can actually listen to the scripture. There's a little speaker icon when you get the scripture on the page, and you can click on that and you can listen to it. And I will say, I know it's a lot of reading every day. So if you get behind, don't get discouraged, but don't give up either. Just keep going and finish at your own pace. Even if you finish a month or two late, it will still be worth the effort. Because if we can pay attention to the lessons that the men and women of Israel learned so many years ago, I think we will be better for it. George Santayana famously said, "Those that cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." And that is a good guide, especially for us when we talk about when we're not sure what to do, when we don't always know what to do in life. That feeling is kind of like being in over your head. You know what I mean? Like if you've ever been swimming before and you're in the deep end the first time and you're trying to figure out what to do and it's a little bit scary, right? And you're struggling. Our youngest, Caden, is just learning how to swim without a floaty on, and we just kind of throw him in the deep end, like, help, and he's grasping for something, and he's struggling, and he's like trying to get onto the edge to hold on and find something to cling to, and that is an exhausting experience, isn't it? When we're in over our heads, especially in swimming. But again, it goes beyond swimming. No matter how old you are, we all have moments in time where we're trying to keep our heads above water. We're trying to figure out what to do in the circumstances of life and the situations we find ourselves in. Whether you're starting college this fall and you're going to be a first-time college student, or whether you graduated and you're figuring out what to do with your life, or maybe you're starting a new school. Whether, again, you've got adult kids and you're trying to figure out, okay, how do I parent my adult kids? Or your kids are going through their own traumatic things, your little ones. How do you deal with them? When you're facing grief and you're just not sure. When you get cut from the team and it's so discouraging. When finances are crumbling and you don't know what to do. When you start a new job. When your marriage is struggling and you're trying to figure out, how do I be a married person? How do I be a divorced person? How do I be a single person? How do I be satisfied not being married, right? Listen, in all of those circumstances and more, how we respond and where we turn for our answers when we don't know what to do will make us or it will break us. And they're so significant that choosing the wrong thing and moving in the wrong direction has damaging consequences. Far bigger than a towel bar falling down. And that's where we can look to Solomon's guidance. Solomon was the third king. Now, last week, we introduced King David. King David was a great king in many regards, but he had a huge mistake that marked his life. One day he saw a woman who was married to another man, and he wanted her as his own, and so he took her, and she got pregnant. Her husband was off to war, and David tried to fix things it didn't fix, so he had her husband killed. He ends up marrying Bathsheba, and David's child dies, but Bathsheba has another son, a son named Solomon. And so as David is nearing death, he affirms that Solomon is going to be the new king. He's going to be David's successor. And it's on his deathbed that David gives some important instructions to his son. So here's what David says. He says, I'm about to go the way of all the earth. Because isn't that the truth, right? We all, that's the one thing we all have in common. We're all going to die. He said, so be strong, act like a man, and observe what the Lord your God requires. Solomon, don't be a weak leader. Act like a man. Pay attention to what God wants for you and from you. And here's what he requires. He continues on. He gives them instructions. He says, walk in obedience to him. Walk in obedience. Do what God says. Obey what God says and keep his decrees and commands, his laws and regulations as written in the law of Moses. Your job as King Solomon is to obey God, because it is not your kingdom, it is his kingdom. These are not your people, they are his people. And so your responsibility is to stay faithful. He says, here's why you should do this. This is great. He says, do this so that you may prosper. Do this so that things go well in your life, in all that you do, and wherever you go, and that the Lord may keep his promise to me. Now, the promise that God had given to David was that because of David's faithfulness, because he was the ideal king and that he turned his heart in God's direction over and over and over again, God promised that David's kingdom would never end, that his throne, that he would always have a successor on the throne. And so David instructs his son Solomon. He says, be faithful to God. Be faithful to God. Now, Solomon, when he began the kingship, he took this to heart. We don't know exactly how old he was, but he was probably around 20 years old. And as a result of this, he went and he offered sacrifices to God. Here's what the text tells us that he did. He says, the king went to Gibeon to offer sacrifices, for that's the most important high place. And Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. He's communicating to God, I am devoted to you. I care about what you want. I want to honor you, God. And God was pleased with Solomon's sacrifices. And so he came to him in a dream. And if you're familiar with Solomon, you may be familiar with this dream. Here's what happens at Gibeon. The Lord appeared to Solomon during the night in a dream, and God said, ask for whatever you want me to give you. Now, that's kind of a dangerous thing to say, isn't it? I mean, it's like the Aladdin lamp, rub it and the genie comes out. Like, what do you wish for? I wish for unlimited wishes. What do you wish for? I mean, we can think of all kinds of things. And he's young, right? I mean, he's like 20 years old. So what do young people today wish for? Lifts on your chariot, LED ground effects on the chariot, women, partying, women, fun, power, no enemies, you crush the opposition, women. Look at Justin Bieber and Taylor Swift. They're in their 20s. What do they hope for? Sleeves of tattoos? A group of believers? Swifties? Tough crowd today. Okay, so even if you're out of your 20s, what do you wish for? What do you wish for? World peace? Confident in your retirement savings? Your kids are happy and healthy? What do you wish for? It's so fascinating. Solomon has the world before him. He has the opportunity to ask for anything. And in those moments, he sees the significance of his leadership. And here's what he says. Solomon answered, he says, you have shown great kindness to your servant. I don't deserve this. Nobody in my family deserves this. He says, my father David, because he was faithful to you and righteous and upright in heart, right? You have continued this, he says, this great kindness to him and have given him a son to sit on his throne this very day. David didn't deserve this. This was your kindness, God. And I know you're behind this. I know that this blessing is my father's legacy, but it's because he was upright in heart, and God, you are honoring him. And then Solomon kind of assesses himself, and he looks at his situation, and he knows he's going to be surrounded with people who probably know more than him, and he's going to have to make decisions, and he's not exactly sure how he's going to decide. So he says, kind of in light of that, he says, now, Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David, but I'm only a little child. Now, he wasn't a little child, but the point is that he's young, I'm inexperienced. He said, and do not know how to carry out my duties. I'm in over my head. Now, think about the humility of being able to say this. I'm in over my head. God, there are going to be situations where I don't know what to do. I just wonder if we could pause for a second and just take a minute to reflect about your own life, your own situation, your own circumstances where you may be in over your head, where you don't know what to do. You're not sure what's next. You got school coming. It's a new place. You just got married. You're entering a new phase. You have a new baby. You're starting a new job. You're ready to retire, and all of it's before you, and you're not sure. You got some health concerns. What if you just said, God, I don't know what to do? The humility of Solomon in these moments to admit that he didn't know is so significant. The willingness to acknowledge a lack of knowledge. He continues on, he says, your servant is here among the people you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to count or number. God, these are your people. I'm just your servant. He says, so give your servant a discerning heart to discover or to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. Because there are lots of perspectives. There are lots of ways we could do things here. But what Solomon says is, God, I want to do things your way. I want to know what's right. I want to know what's wrong. Give me discernment so that I can distinguish between the two. Do you know what he's praying for? He's praying for wisdom. And not wisdom of the world around him, wisdom that comes from God. These are your people, God. Give me your wisdom. He goes on, he says, for who's able to govern this great people of yours? They're your people. Your people. I want to do what's right. Now, this is such a big deal because, again, Solomon could have asked for anything. I mean, he could have approached leadership however he wanted to do it. He could have done it the way other nations were doing it, but he just says, I don't know. I know I don't know. And I'm admitting my humility, encourage, I'm inviting your work in me. See, the thing you need to know today is this, that God honors our prayers for wisdom. And he gives us the wisdom that we seek for, that we ask for. And Solomon's life is a beautiful example of this in many regards. The text tells us that the Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. So God said to him, since you have asked for this and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have you asked for the death of your enemies, but for discernment in administering justice, he says, I will do what you've asked. I'll give you a wise and discerning heart so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. I am honoring your request. Not only am I honoring your request, but Solomon, I'm going to give you all those things you didn't ask for. I'm going to bless you incredibly because you had the foresight and the wisdom to ask for wisdom. And that's what Solomon became known for. Now, what's kind of interesting is shortly after this, he's approached by two prostitutes. And there's a situation that he was brought before him, and this is what helped him gain so much notoriety in being such a wise person. So these two prostitutes, they lived together, they shared a house, and they both had baby boys that were born within about 3 days of one another. So one night they're asleep, and the gal who gave birth to the second baby, she ends up rolling on her baby, and the baby does not survive. A tragedy. And she wakes up and realizes this, and so she swaps her baby with the other prostitute's baby. So the other prostitute wakes up and says, this isn't my child. This isn't my child. This dead baby is not my child. And she confronts the second one, and the second woman says, no, it is your child. You know, this one's mine. And suddenly there's this dilemma of what do we do? What do we do? And so the ladies, they go before Solomon, and they share their stories. And you probably know how this story goes, but in case you don't, I'll go ahead and tell you, Solomon comes up with a genius solution to it. You know what his solution is? Cut the baby in half and give half of a baby to each woman. Now, those of you who have kids with video game systems, just see what happens when you say, cut the Xbox in half. Give each kid one half of an Xbox. See how happy they will be. Obviously, this wasn't going to satisfy both of the women. The one who was the genuine mother, she couldn't imagine her baby being injured. And so she says, no, let her keep the baby. And the one whose baby had died, she says, I think that's a great idea. Let's cut the baby in half and we'll each get half. And so Solomon, he understood who was the mother, who was not. And word got out of Solomon's verdict. People were just in awe of what he had done. The text tells us that when all of Israel heard the verdict the king had given, they held the king in awe because they saw that he had wisdom from God to administer justice. Now, here's what's so fascinating about this account. If two prostitutes came to you and they were sharing the same argument, how might you have responded to those women? I think about myself, and my answer would be along the lines of, you made a grave mistake when you continued in this life of prostitution. And I'm not sure that prostitutes raising a child is necessarily the healthiest, best place for a child to be. And so my verdict is neither of you gets the child. We're going to put the child up for adoption so he can grow up in a stable household. I mean, that's where I would go. But the beauty of Solomon's wisdom, and don't miss this, because this intersects with the person of Jesus, who on the cross is able to look at his accusers and see good in the midst of bad. And he's willing to say, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. There is something good in there. And Solomon, rather than caricaturing these women and pointing out their gaping flaws and caricaturing a class of people, he sees good in the midst of ugly. He sees honor in the midst of a dishonorable life. And he sees beauty in the broken, and he says, I'm going to honor the love this mother has for her child. It's really beautiful, and it is a reflection of what Jesus would show 1,000 years later when he walked onto the scene. And so because of Solomon's wisdom, the nation of Israel prospered. They prospered with wealth. It was known as the golden age of Israel. They prospered with peace and prosperity, and those are all connected to wisdom, we discover. And this is so important to know, that wisdom doesn't guarantee peace, wealth, and prosperity, but it makes them more likely. It makes them more likely. And so as Solomon wrote so many proverbs during his kingship, and we have many of them recorded in the book of Proverbs, what we discover is not necessarily promises attached to a way of life, but a direction attached to a way of life, that when we walk down a path of wisdom, we discover peace, wealth, and prosperity. They're not absolute guarantees, but they are more likely when we choose to be wise. Now, there's one particular proverb I just want to take a couple minutes and show you, because I just think it is so rich, and I think it's a mirror to the words that David had given his son Solomon on his deathbed, as he's directing Solomon to walk in the paths that God had for him. If you grew up in church, this might be familiar to you. If not, just regardless of how you approach this, I just want to invite you to pay attention and lean in, because I am telling you, our lives will be better. They will be better if we do this. Take a look at what he says, Proverbs chapter 3. Verse 5. He says, trust, which is the opposite of worry. It's the opposite of self-reliance. It's the opposite of I'm going to do it all on my own and figure it out myself. He says, trust instead in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. He says, throw the weight of your concerns, the weight of your judgment, your moral decisions, your ethical decisions, the weight of everything you face, throw them on God. And in doing so, you're declaring that God is trustworthy, that he knows that he created the foundations of this world. Do not fall into the trap, he says, of believing that you know it all. Do not fall into the trap of thinking that you have the answers for all of life's problems. Instead, trust. And then he goes on, he says this. He says, in all your ways. In all your ways. And the reality is we all have a lot of ways, don't we? We have work ways, we have dating ways, we have social media ways, we have education ways, we have talking to our parents ways, we have grandparenting ways, we have retirement ways, we have financial ways, we have adulting ways, we have going to the bar on Friday night ways. We have Friday night, Saturday night, spring break ways. We have party ways. We have marriage ways. We have single life ways. We have divorce life ways. We have sports ways. We've got all kinds of ways. Entertainment ways. He said, in all of your ways, not just a few, not just one or two, but in all of your ways, in those ways and more, he says, submit to him. That when you think about all of the ways in your life, all the things you're going to do, all the decisions you're going to make, the best decision you could make is to submit to God. Now, if you're here today and you're kind of a newbie and you're figuring out this whole church thing and Jesus thing and you're not really sure if you agree with it or believe it or whatever, I mean, that's a little bit of a tough pill to swallow, right? Because who am I to tell you that you need to submit to God in all your ways, right? And I get that, I'm nobody. I'm just the preacher, right? So you don't have to believe me or lean into me. But the thing I want you to know is that wisdom is not meant to be condemnational. It's meant to be invitational. And this wasn't a hellfire and brimstone message that Solomon was giving. This was a test and see. Test and see. Give it a try and apply. We say that here sometimes. Give it a try and apply and just see what happens. Because here's the thing that I can just tell you from my own personal experience. When I have failed to submit to him, when I have gone my own way, pursued my own pleasure, thought about my own, I'm going to get whatever it is that I want out of life, what's interesting is I never end up getting it. I never end up getting it. Those are the times in my life where I suffer regret. I hurt the people I care about. I carry all kinds of unhappiness. I want to go back and redo them. I want to go back and unsay them. I want to go back and unsee them. Solomon says, no, the way you solve that, the way you get over that is you just submit to him in all your ways. And when you do that, he says he will make your paths straight. Now, to make a straight path, it's like the idea of clearing a highway, right? We see this from time to time. When they're clearing a highway, they're making it flat, they're making it easy, it's a level road. Or if you've ever been at a beach and you build a sandcastle and you pour water and then you pull, sand and make a trench and you see the water running through it and it's giving it clear direction of where to go. That's what Solomon's saying, is that when we submit to him in all of our ways, he gives us a clear direction of where to go and what to do. What to do when we don't know what to do. Particularly when it comes down to ethical decisions, when it comes down to moral decisions. What Solomon says is submission to God is the best path. The opposite of that is, I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to do it on my own. I'm going to trust in my own understanding and lean in my own understanding. He continues on, he says this, he says, do not be wise in your own eyes. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Don't give in to the temptation of thinking you know, because your heartstrings are just pulled in that direction and you're feeling the emotions and the warm fuzzies or whatever. Or it's because what everyone else is doing and you're seeing it and you're getting the idea that I want to join in with the fun. He says, don't be wise in your own eyes. Instead, fear the Lord and shun evil. And he says, this will bring health to your body and nourishment to your bones. It's the submission to God that's going to give you the thing that you're ultimately searching for. See, what Solomon's doing is he's setting up two paths for us. We can either rely on our own understanding, or we could submit to God's ways. Rely on our own understanding, and when we do that, we rarely end up with what we're searching for. And the reason is that the things that Solomon talks about, the health, the well-being, they're not on the path of our own understanding. They're not. The peace, the wealth, the prosperity, they're on the path of submission to God. They're on the other path. And it's not necessarily a reward that God is giving us because he's patting us on the back saying, good job, you obeyed. It's the benefit of being on the correct path. And so one of the best things that we can ask ourselves in life is not, is this right? Should I do this? That's not the right thing. One of the best questions we should ask ourselves is this wise? What's the wise thing to do? Not, is it okay? Is everybody else doing it? Is that what my heart tells me I should do? But is it wise? Really? Is it wise to have one more? Is it wise to text her back? Is it wise to go there with that group? Is it wise to take out this loan? Really, what's wise? And the beautiful thing is you don't have to be a follower of Jesus to be able to ask that question. You don't. In fact, Solomon talks about how God built wisdom into the foundations of the earth, that we inherently know. When we pause long enough and slow down long enough, instead of considering what everybody else is doing, and ask ourselves, really, what's the wise thing to do? Anybody can ask this. Now, I think Jesus followers, we're actually obligated to ask it. And I think our version should be a little different. It becomes a prayer of God. What's the wise thing to do? But I don't want to just stop there. I don't want to simply know what the wise thing to do is. What's the wise thing to do? And help me to do it. See, the beauty of wisdom isn't simply in the knowing, it's in the doing. Doing is predicated on knowing. We have to know in order to do, but if we don't do anything with it, we're not actually being wise. And that's the challenge, isn't it? Every day throughout the school year, I take my kids to school. This year, I'll have 3 in the car, 3 different schools. Yay, I'm excited for that. And as we're traveling in the car, I'll talk to the kids about the day. We've got about 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes in the car. I'll talk to them about the day. What are you excited about? What are you looking forward to? Is there anything, that's weighing heavy on you? And how are your friends? Any tests, things like that. We'll sing a song usually, and then I'll pray for them. And one of the prayers that has just been impressed on me so much that I want to pray for them is, God, help Madeline, Noelle, Caden, help them to know what the right thing is to do, and help them to do it even if it isn't popular. Even if no one else is doing it, God, help them to know what's right, and don't help them to just know it. Help them to do it. Because the thing is, even if no one else walks wisely, there is a blessing for people who walk wisely. There's a blessing for those who choose to do what's right, even when no one else is doing it. As a church, over the last 3 months or so, we've been talking about what it means to be a disciple, right? We've kind of unpacked the word Christian, if you've been with us. And we said, Christian isn't a great word because it's not defined in the New Testament, and it's been applied and misapplied in a lot of ways. And so we said a better term is disciple, right? And a disciple is one who says, okay, what does Jesus say? And what do I need to do in response to that? And one of the instructions Jesus gave his followers at the end of his time on earth was, hey, you want to know how people are going to know you're my followers? If you love one another. Not if you just talk about loving one another, but if you actually go out and do it. When people are in a right relationship with God, and when we're in a right relationship with other people, things will be right in our lives. Even if we don't know in the moment what the wise thing to do is, even if we're not sure in those moments in life what's the right decision I should make here, the reality is, if we're right with God and if we're right with people, we will be moving in the direction of wisdom. Now, here's the thing. We can probably all relate to Solomon in some ways, because oftentimes we know what's wise, but we don't always do what's wise. As I said earlier, knowing what's wise, it doesn't guarantee doing what's wise. And the tragedy of Solomon's leadership and the tragedy of his history as a king is that he did not follow his own wisdom. He did not acknowledge God in all of his ways. He had a foreign affairs ways where he would make treaties with other countries, and in order to do that, he would marry the daughters of those kings, to the point where Solomon had 700 wives, which just doesn't seem wise to me. I don't know. A wife a day may not keep the doctor away. And so it led his heart astray, because all these women, they worshiped all these foreign gods, and Solomon wanted to keep them happy. And so he brought in worship of all of these foreign gods. And he led the nation of Israel astray. And the result is that the kingdom, we're going to talk about this next week, it's separated in two. It ended up becoming a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom with separate kings, and it was a mess. And you got to thinking about, how would the story have been different if Solomon hadn't just known the right thing, but chose to do the right thing? And the big difference between King David and King Solomon isn't that they failed. They both failed. They both failed. What made David the ideal king is that he confessed and he corrected. He said, this is not right. I am walking in an unwise way. I'm going to move back. God, forgive me. God, forgive me. I have failed. I want to bring myself back. He chose not to lean on his own understanding. So before we go today, I just wonder, in what ways are you leaning on your own understanding? You don't have to answer that out loud, but man, I hope you'll sit with this. And I hope you'll ask yourself, where am I being wise in my own eyes? In what ways? Maybe it's your Friday night ways and your Saturday night ways. Maybe it's in your dating ways or your honesty ways or your manipulation ways or your parenting ways or your entertainment ways and what you put into your mind ways or your relationship ways. The wise person sits with this and says, am I going to be like David or am I going to be like Solomon? Because you can submit to God in some of your ways and you'll still suffer. It's when we submit to him in all of our ways that there's a blessing attached and an invitation for us. And the reality is, it's possible there's a way or two or more in your life where you are not submitting to him. The question is, what will you do with that? A number of years ago, there was a moment in time in my life where I recognized there were some decisions that I was making that were not, it was my own way. It was my own understanding. And I'll never forget waking up one morning, having a quiet time, and God just impressed this so hard on me. And the thing is, right, in order to acknowledge you've been going down the wrong way, that takes some humility, takes some embarrassment. It takes some being truthful with people maybe you haven't been truthful with. And it was so hard. And in that moment, I just remember writing on a little sheet of paper saying, Seth, do the right thing. In that moment, I prayed, God, help me to do the right thing as hard as it is. Help me to surrender to your ways. If you want to be a man after God's own heart, if you want to be a woman after God's own heart, if you want the blessing that Solomon talks about that is attached to walking wisely, you have to do it in all of your ways. Solomon, ironically, chose to be a fool. You know what a fool is? A fool is somebody who knows what's wise and chooses not to do it. The way you foolproof your life is by being like David, who confessed, he corrected, and God blessed him, and he ended up blessing the kingdom because of him. So, in what ways are you leaning on your own understanding? Well, you have the courage. You have the courage to say, God, I want to move in a different way. It's in that place that he wants to bless you. Let me pray for us. Heavenly Father, it is just amazing to me that this literature has been preserved for so many years. And not just literature, God, inspired work that points us in the direction of you. God, it's remarkable to me how little the world has changed as much as the world has changed, and that people and our problems are largely the same. And God, I just pray for each one of us that we would have an honest moment of assessment as we look at our ways, the different ways that we go about living our lives, that we would seek to turn in your direction. God, that as we invite you into that space and say, God, what is the wise thing to do? That you would show us, that you would reveal it to us, and then you would give us the courage to do it. And Father, I just pray for this room, for those who might be watching online. I pray for those who perhaps have been figuring life out on their own and doing their own thing and being wise in their own eyes. And in doing so, they are suffering. They are hurting not just themselves, they're hurting the people they love the most. And it's not moving them in the direction they want to move in. God, would you give each one of us the humility? Would you give each one of us the courage to move in your direction? Father, thank you for this time. I pray again, give us wisdom, give us courage. Would you be honored and glorified? I pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.